Hi, everybody. I'm back again with UnderColor. We're talking about activism, addressing cultural and environmental threats in vulnerable communities. Today, I'm really excited to have June Grant with me. June is the founder and design principal at Blink Lab Architecture, a boutique research-based architecture and urban design practice launched in 2014. Blink Lab was created based on Ms. Grant's 20 years experience in architecture, design, and urban regeneration of cities and communities. Her design approach rests on an avid belief in cultural empathy, data research, and new technologies as integral to design futures and design solutions. Blink Lab has 3 mandates: a commitment to design exploration, advocacy for holistic solutions, and the integration of technology as a central component for a regenerative society. Ms. Grant is the immediate past president of the San Francisco chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, NOMA, board member of Acadia, and a YBCA 100 honoree, 2020 CEDAW Human Rights honoree, and the 2020 10th annual J. Max Bond Jr. lecturer. So I want to welcome June and thank her for joining us today. So hi, June.
Hi, Dan. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing really good. I'm so glad you could do this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Good. So first thing I want to ask you is, do you consider yourself an activist?
No. I in my mind's eye, the activists are the ones who are out there in the public taking the physical onslaught and assault, and in the public press, they put their bodies at risk. So I don't see myself as an activist, but I support activism. So I'm more in the background, less in the front, on the front lines, in my mind's eye.
Okay. Well, maybe there are different kinds of activism.
There you go.
So what cultural and environmental threats exist for vulnerable communities? And along with that, if you could give me your definition of what you think a vulnerable community is, and then what cultural and environmental threats you think exist for them.
Okay, so I'll define vulnerable communities. For me, vulnerable communities are those who have not been in, say, a city's budget. They are not the ones who are given priority in the city decisions. They are not the ones who make top of line in most of our decisions. So they are vulnerable because they are more considered remnants of decisions. And I think we can be honest when we say, when we're writing policy, if you're to close your mind's eye, and after reading policy decisions that have been made in the past, and actually some of the present, the person they're writing with in mind is typically not African American, not Indian, not Hispanic, not person of color in the way the policies are being framed. And the goalposts are usually people who are white or environments that are white, predominantly white. So if you keep that as an understanding of vulnerable populations, they're the ones that we don't think of as we're writing policy or general policy or universal policy. They're considered the people who receive the impact of policy. So with that in mind, cultural vulnerability and environmental impact is the culture that's there. For me, there are twofolds. There's the racial culture, the ethnic culture, and then there's a culture that exists within institutions. And I become very cynical, but I've found that the culture within the hallways of City Hall and government are actually quite biased, prejudicial, and very paternalistic in how they write policy or view community. It's a top down. And for that reason, those who are on receiving end of these internal cultural decisions are the external cultures that receive the impact. So the external cultures, the people who live on the margins of our cities, the people who have been relegated to the least desirable land within cities and rural environments, whether you're talking about swampland or you're talking about areas that are zoned next to industrial zones. Those are culturally vulnerable communities because they've always existed on the edge. They've always been given the leftover, and they're never been considered primary in mind of where we're going and what we'd like to do. So environmental vulnerabilities are tied to both the political culture, the governing body culture, and then where are people located? And we can give some clear examples in the city of Oakland. We have exactly one arborist for the entire city. And you can see on a map where trees are versus trees are not, and where trees have been allowed to decline and where trees are being maintained. You can see clearly where there are friends of the tree groups. Those are the voluntary groups that support the trees, and the friends of the trees. Where do they live? They live in the hills, and where there are communities, there are already trees. And communities that have no time for trees have no friends of the trees. And I see this as part of the vulnerable experiences that exist today that we're not talking about, which are these informal relationships that travel parallel to and alongside formal cultural, political, governing agency relationships. They support them. And here we are, a situation where our cities, we have this in parallel universes where the cultural and environmental impacts of some decisions are being felt radically different. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I am trying to paint a picture of there are two systems at play. One is government and planning agencies, and then there are those who are not the part of the official anointed planning group who receive the decisions that are made and are given the remnants and the impact of decisions that are made outside of the community.
No, I think you're spot on. And one thing that, like you just said it again here, was that, often these communities have no say. They're not given any agency, but they're definitely given the impact, right? They're where the freeway dropped, or, they get displaced because the new whatever park's coming, or,
opportunities, the new opportunities.
Yeah. So they're not given agency, but they're given impact. Yeah. So that was spot on. Very powerful. Thank you. So I want to know then, how do you address these issues in your work?
Wow. Pre-COVID, since pre-COVID, when the studio opened in 2014, one of the things I was very clear about was I was going to spend 5 years allowing every request that the community had to me, and we would either take it on or direct it to someone else who we thought would be a better fit. So literally, I went to community meetings. I went to meetings that were outside my immediate office address. I went to community meetings across the entire city of Oakland, primarily to hear directly from the community, but also to see the environments within which conversations were taking place. Because as spatial designers, we are aware that the space impacts how the conversation goes and how you are able to transmit what you want to transmit. And does it foster dialogue? And so we spent 5 years going to meetings, establishing relationships, basically putting myself out there, because as far as I knew, there were only 5 licensed African-American female architects in the Bay Area. And so I just said, I'm going to do what I can as part of how the practice is formed, which is community work is integral. It is not after hours, it is integral to how we practice. Gathering and establishing those relationships allowed me to see where architects and planners and landscape architects and engineers could actually play a larger role. And one was, I recognize, let's take a development project. Developers and urban planners who are hired by the city speak one language. Architects, developers, we speak a specific language. The community speaks another language. It's as if one group speaks French and the other one speaks Greek. They are not related in any way whatsoever. However, as architects and planners, we actually understand both sides of the table. And so I situated myself kind of as an intermediary, but with a clear bias that I was representing the community. I was not representing the developer or the city, because my role was to play as translator for the city, to translate for the community their desires and put it in a language that the planners and developers would understand, so that we could get to some kind of consensus or be able to shift how a project was proceeding. And that's pretty much how I have established a practice. And so, in fact, last week, someone asked me, who's my client? And I said, the future of the community is my client. So I actually sit in the future, understanding I have both legs, one leg trying to transform a developer, the other leg trying to educate, but also listen to the community and put everything on a pathway towards some kind of agreed future, because that is my goal. And I think everyone has a goal about a better future. It's just that we're speaking different languages and we're using different tools. And so that's how I have played the role the last 5 or 6 years. And then now what we've done is taken on specific projects with the goal to develop them a longer term relationship, where we're creating the implementation strategy for projects, where we'll hear the overall goal. Example, a library will create the street campaign to get the awareness around the project going, to get public advocacy so that we can build our army. And then internally, we can build a professional skill, bring this professional skill sets to the table, because I know who to bring. But you cannot deliver a project without community support. And so we actually spend a lot of time creating that outside campaign that supports a project so that it can get funding elsewhere. So we do a lot of design strategy.
That's really great. What I really love is the idea that you're kind of like the translator, right? Because if people don't hear you or don't want to hear you, then and having, someone to, so you're not like being the voice, but being more like translating the voice of the community.
Correct.
Yes. And then also the other way around, so that the community really, because often, communities misunderstand, think politics and politicians.
Their expectations are sometimes on both sides of the table. The expectations are different, and a lot of it has to do with experience. And so what we're also finding now, after having spent 5 or 6 years working and listening to communities, what we're seeing is, okay, in order for them to acquire even greater agencies, a little bit of education. So now we're actually aligning ourselves with workshops, like developer workshops, so that the community can attend these developer workshops, so that we can stop doing the education about what is development and get back to what we really like doing, which is design. So what we're doing is pivoting the community to go, okay, I see you'd like to be your own developer. Here is a class, because we need you to understand what a feasibility study is. We don't really want to educate you about what it is. We would like you to go elsewhere and get a third-party opinion about what it is, so that we can deliver our service and you can have a third-party reviewer of the quality of the work that we're doing. Mm-hmm.
But, that creates, them being able to understand, to be able to move these, creates design. It's like I was saying someone that I kind of think it's all the design process, right? You got to have that in order to have that. So what you're doing is important on both ends. Great. So then the last question is, given, the crazy time, I don't know if it's crazy. I mean, The country's always been crazy. I guess people were sitting back
just different crazy.
40 years. Yes, it's so crazy. Yes, in 1968, I'm sure they were saying it's crazy. But
oh yeah.
So during the times we're in and the impacts, what do you think the future is? Say like in the next 10, 20 years of these communities. How do you see?
Oh man. I am both excited and very disturbed. I am excited because what the pandemic did was put everybody on halt. And so it allowed some individuals to catch up and organizations to put their goals and aspirations even further forward. The urgency of what many communities have been saying for generations suddenly is being taken very seriously. Philanthropy is that whole industry, trillions of dollars being shifted towards what communities have been asking for decades. So I'm excited by that. I'm truly excited that, oh my God, all of a sudden we have a lot more serious interest in the issues and the spotlight on it. And what I love about the millennials is that they're really good about holding that spotlight and making sure that the topics in the forefront. That has been tremendously exciting. I'm also excited that, and it's more larger firms are now being pushed and examine, well, how are you receiving contracts? How are you working with smaller firms? Governing agencies, which we have been clamoring about their public contracting process, are starting to ask some questions, although I have very little hope or faith in their ability to change. But every industry, every part of a contract is being tested about your past performance and how we can make change. So I'm really excited about that opportunity to be able to address some of these issues in contracting, public contracting, private contracting. I've even had banks, major international banks, call and ask, how can we get more minority firms in our pipeline to design our banks? That was an incredible call. I mean, that's a dream to have them call instead of me trying to figure out who do I call to address a situation, right? So the calls are coming towards me. The calls are coming towards NOMA, and that in itself is exciting. I'm also excited about housing, which I have avoided my entire architecture profession up until recently. And I avoided housing because, in my opinion, the technology that was being used to build housing was highly inefficient. The processes that were being used to build housing and design housing was highly inefficient. And we were wasting funds on both the construction method and the process of design. And I didn't see myself sitting in that when I could make change elsewhere. But the dire need for housing and the speed at which we need it is forcing change in both how it's delivered, how it's built, the process of design, and also the need for community voice in the design of housing. The fact that housing, which I detest the term because it sounds to me as if we're creating file cabinets for human beings. And I prefer, and this is a relatively new term for me, is housing the community. One is just saying housing is creating a box within which you put people. But housing the community for me gives me a dashed line circle within which there are activities that support a community. And that's what we're designing towards. So we're designing towards a better school system. We're designing towards more trees, better sidewalks, better buildings. So if we start to change the language that we're using, we have the potential to build better the way we want to build, not back better. Now, where I'm a little bit concerned, and this is where I spend quite a bit of my time, we actually are almost a paperless office. So we have always worked in virtual space ever since the office opened. How I communicate with clients have always been through interactive models. We've just never broadcasted or publicized that that's how we work, but that's how I've always worked. now that technology is here, because we are forced to work through a digital medium, it is forcing change in how we design and how we interact and how we present our designs. That is great, because from design to approval is shorter, because now I can walk in virtual space with a client and they can be in virtual space with me, looking at a corner detail, looking at what the building would look like, being able to walk through the building themselves. That's great. That's absolutely mind-blowing. The downside is virtual space is an invitation-only space. You cannot walk by and see what I'm seeing. If I was in the coffee shop sketching, you could, look over my shoulder and say, oh, that's kind of cool sketch. You can't do that in virtual space. There is no accidental meeting. That is concerning to me.
That's because you control the image that I see. Totally.
Not just that. If you are excluded in the physical, if you're physically excluded in if you're excluding the physical world, like most Black folks are from most power dynamics, guess what? You're even more excluded in virtual space, because I have to invite you.
Yeah. And you have the technology to get into.
That's right. So that is scary to me because of the level of exclusivity that virtual reality presents. But augmented reality, which is different, presents some hope. For the part that I am excited about is being able to introduce augmented reality to our African-American construction trade. Because if we don't bring our trade skills into the digital and the virtual space, African-American construction labor will lose. They will not be part of the future. And so I am excited about, because I exist in the digital space, to be able to bring that knowledge to the construction industry, at the African-American team, to say, I know you may not think this is important right now, but I have to let you know that robots are coming to the construction site, and you need to know about this. You need to trust me that this is coming. So that's, it's both. We have the opportunity to have a broader conversation and more integrated design, but I'm also seeing where, oh my God, we are heading down a path of amazing exclusivity that is really, really concerning.
Thank you so much. I never thought of that. I love the idea. It's a simple thing, like housing the community. And it's because the community is not just individual in a dwelling. A community, yes, like you said, it needs parks, it needs schools, it needs grocery stores.
Yes.
So you think and housing and transport. So you can think of it in a more holistic way. Just
yes,
that twist of thinking.
Yes.
You're so brilliant.
It just came to it, can I just say that this term housing has irked me for decades, and that's probably why I avoided it. And then I realized, no, my interest is the regeneration of communities.
Yes.
And if I'm going to talk about what we sleep in, eat in, make love in, I need to be able to address it on a bigger scale, not within the confines of how we're using this term. And so I thought, okay, housing the community kind of fits better for me. So that just came to me 2 days ago. You can have it.
But it makes it more interesting and more, in reality, because people need more than a box.
Yes, we are more than a box.
Yeah, they need that. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I so appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. That was a nice, quick and easy. I like it.